Okay, we are live now.
Okay.
So you should be able to locate it now on our Facebook timeline. Is everyone able to locate it?
What do you? Let's get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Antonio Downing, and I'm the first Vice President of the Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP. I'd like to welcome those of you that are tuned in via Facebook Live for this virtual town hall for the Judicial Candidates Forum. This town hall will give us the opportunity to hear from each candidate that will be running for the 4 Anne Arundel County Circuit Court seats for this June 2nd, 2020 Maryland primary election. Tonight's event is being sponsored by the partnering organizations of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Anne Arundel County chapter, the North Arundel County Alumni chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated, the Arundel Bay Area chapter of Jack and Jill of America, and the Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated RHOETAZETA chapter. At this time, I would like to ask each representative of the partnering organizations to give us a brief introduction, starting with Marshall.
Good evening. My name is Marshall Halsey, and I'm the president of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Anne Arundel County chapter. We welcome you to this town hall forum to speak with our judicial candidates and get their perspective on what they can offer to the county. Again, welcome.
Thank you. Sean.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sean Ashworth, and I am the president of North Arundel County Chapter Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Welcome to this evening. Remember, your vote matters and it counts. So tonight is a great opportunity to hear what the judges have to say. Good evening.
Thank you. Ramika.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ramika Brashear, and I'm the president of the Arundel Bay Area chapter of Jack and Jill of America Incorporated. I welcome you to this virtual town hall forum. We are excited to be a part of this, as it is important to be knowledgeable and aware of what's going on in our communities. So again, welcome.
And Latanya.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Latanya Wesley Ward. I am the president of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, RHOETAZETA chapter in Anne Arundel County. And I echo my fellow presidents of respective organizations and welcoming you to this forum this evening. Again, I echo their same sentiments that your vote matters, your voice counts, and please engage in the process. Again, welcome, and I hope you find it informative.
I'd like to say thank you to our partnering organizations for those great comments. At this time, we will have our Anne Arundel County Assistant Secretary, Monique Brown, to go over the ground rules for tonight's town hall.
Thank you, Antonio. Good evening, everyone. My name is Monique Brown, and I am the Assistant Secretary for the Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP. I would like to say thank you to everyone that is participating and extend a special thank you to our judicial candidates that are joining us this evening. I know that everyone is looking forward to hearing from you all, so we really appreciate it. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick overview of how our town hall will be conducted this evening. For the majority of our town hall, most of you all will be muted. And the reason why we're proceeding this way is that we want to make sure that there are as little as possible noises or distractions so that our audience members can hear our moderators as well as our candidates. So you will not be able to unmute yourselves, but we will make sure that when the candidates are ready to respond, that they are unmuted. Every candidate will have an opportunity to introduce themselves and give the audience members some background information about themselves. We are asking that you try to limit your introductions to 1 minute. We know that that may be difficult to do, but we would like to make sure that we stay on schedule and try to allocate as much time as possible to answering questions. So when you hear a bell, that will indicate that your 1 minute has passed. During our town hall, as our moderators are asking questions, only those judicial candidates that the questions are directed to will be unmuted. And again, we will make sure that we take care of that. We are asking that you try to limit your responses to 2 minutes because we would like to make sure that we get to all of our questions. So once about 1.5 minutes has passed, you will hear a warning bell letting you know that your time has almost ended. And once 2 minutes has elapsed, you will hear a second bell. For the last portion of our town hall, we will be accepting questions through Facebook. These questions will be open to all of our judicial candidates. And in order to maintain order, what we are asking is that if you would like to respond to a question, that you use the raise your hand option that is located inside of your Zoom view. If anyone is having difficulties with that, you can always feel free to send me a message inside of our chat box. To our audience members that are on Facebook, we are monitoring questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to place them in there and we will try to make sure that we get to as many questions as possible. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Monique. At this time, I will ask Ms. Rhonda Caldwell-Dove, member of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, to introduce our moderators for this evening. Rhonda.
Good evening, everybody. Our first moderator this morning is Tory Snow. He has established the Maryland chapter of the Frederick Douglass Foundation in 2018. The foundation is a conservative organization focused on addressing community issues. Tory is actively involved in Maryland politics and is very instrumental in improving minority engagement with the Republican Party. Tory serves as a fill-in talk show host on WBAL. And he also serves on multiple community boards, including the Maryland Black Republican Council. Tory is always looking for new opportunities to raise awareness for community issues. He can be reached online at Tory Snow, Citizen Statesman. Nikendra Robinson is a native of Maryland. She was born in Baltimore. She is the founder and CEO of Black Girls Vote, a nonpartisan grassroots organization that is focused on encouraging and mobilizing African-American women to use their voting power to advocate for issues that impact African-American women and their families. Nike is also labeled as a millennial on the move due to her vast involvement in community engagement as an outreach specialist. In 2018, Nike was admitted into the 50th anniversary class of the National Urban Fellow Program, where she earned her Master's of Public Administration from Baruch College in New York City in 2019. Nike enjoys traveling, listening to music, and connecting great people. And we greatly thank Nike and Tori for serving as tonight's moderator.
Thank you very much, Rhonda. At this point, we'll turn it over to our first moderator, Ms. Nike Robinson.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Rhonda, for such a warm introduction. Again, my name is Nike Robinson. I'm the founder and CEO of Black Girls Vote, and what an honor it is to be here amongst so many amazing people. But I first want to thank the organizations that put this on together, the 5 organizations that came together and said they each have a history of fighting for rights and civil rights, or just making sure that communities, particularly communities of color, are a part of the conversation, and the work that they're doing is unparalleled. So thank you for putting on this amazing event and asking me to be a part of it. I want to thank Tori in advance for working alongside me today to have a great, honest, and exciting conversation with our judicial candidates in Anne Arundel County. So I would like to start, and I'm going to call you each out randomly with just an introductory question. And this question will just be 1 minute. And that question is, I want to ask you all, it's more so a get to know you, a brief introduction, and tell us how did your background prepare you to be a circuit court judge? And I want to start with Judge Trunnell. You're on mute. Okay.
Hi, my name is Rich Trunnell. I am a circuit court judge as we speak. I was appointed by the governor in December of 2019 to be a circuit court judge. I'm 58 years old. I was born and raised in Maryland. I moved to Anne Arundel County in 1991 when I married my wife. And we have 2 children, Elizabeth, 25, who's a dental student, and my son, who graduates tomorrow from University of Maryland. I've been practicing law since 1988. I clerked for a judge before that. I spent 5 years as a prosecutor, and I've represented clients, private clients, since 1993 till I became a judge. I practiced family law, criminal defense after I left the prosecutor's office, and I also did other civil law. By one of my age and the fact that I went right from high school to college, I am the most experienced candidate before you. And I particularly am fond of representing children, both in juvenile cases, as well as I'm appointed, before I became a judge, I was appointed best interest attorney and also was a mediator. Was it my time up?
Well, the bell hasn't rung yet, but
I thought someone said the bell had rung. I apologize. I thought I heard someone said I was over. But anyway, I also did mediation, and I taught other attorneys how to represent children, both as best interest attorney in the juvenile justice system. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Judge Trunnell, and congratulations on your son graduating tomorrow.
Oh, it's so exciting.
Congratulations.
God, I got them both out.
Good for you. All right, next I'm going to go over to Ms. Decesaris, please. You have to unmute. You should see it in the bottom left corner.
Okay.
You got it.
Okay. Hi, my name is Annette Decesaris, and I'm a Maryland lifelong resident. I used to live in Prince George's County up until 22 years ago when I moved here to Anne Arundel County with my husband of 36 years and my 2 young sons. We all still live in Anne Arundel County. My sons are not that young anymore. One of them does work for DOD and one of them works for a lovely restaurant in Annapolis with a pedigree education. I have been practicing law for 22 years, mostly in the 13 area jurisdictions. I have also, during my practice, I have mainly focused on family law. I've also dealt with some criminal cases, not a lot of them. I've dealt with the whole litigation itself in terms of civil litigation with a focus on real estate and contract law. And prior to becoming a lawyer, I was in the construction industry for 10 years. And prior to that, I used to teach in Prince George's County at Forestville High School. And I think that my vast experiences, unlike the other candidates, it makes me more qualified to become a judge because I take from those experiences, because I've met so many different people and so many different cultures. And I've dealt with young children at teaching at Forestville High School and the 2 middle schools. And I've also dealt with a lot of children during my practice, as well as families. When I was building in Prince George's County, that's what we built predominantly. So I think that my experiences gives me a more vast opportunity to deal with other people and to be able to reach them in a way that I could take my experiences and take their concerns and whatever their issues are and try to address those issues.
Thank you so much, Ms. Decesaris. Next, I'm going to come over to Judge Morris. Judge Morris, you have to unmute. You need me to?
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I thought you said that we could not unmute ourselves. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm unmuted now.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Liz Morris. I'm one of the judges, along with Alban, Thompson, and Trunnell, that Governor Hogan appointed in a nonpartisan process where we were vetted, where our temperament, integrity, experience, and commitment to the community was vetted through that process. As a judge, since 2018, I've presided over hundreds of cases, included violent crime, property disputes, contracts, disputes, divorce, custody. As there's 6 of us on the call and 4 of us are actually presiding over cases currently. My background before I came to the bench helped me with this position. I worked at NSA in the Office of General Counsel. I worked in the Attorney General's office in Maryland, in private practice and law firms, as well as nonprofit organizations. So that background was very broad, and it did help me to become the judge that I am today. In addition, when I applied for the position, I understood that even though I had a vast background as an attorney, being a judge is a very different role. So what I did was I actually interviewed dozens of judges who I respected to get their input as far as what the challenges are for the position and to get their advice so that I could become, if appointed, the best judge that I can be. So thank you. And I also want to thank all the sponsoring organizations for this amazing opportunity.
Thank you, Judge Morris. Next, Judge Thompson, I'm coming to you. Yeah, you have to got it.
We were down to 2, so I thought there was a 50% chance it might be me. My name is Rob Thompson. Thank you all for having me here with you. It is a great pleasure to be here, and I want to thank all the host organizations as well. I think the question was, how did your background prepare you to be a judge? And I would have to say that I think my background prepared me very well to be a judge. I was in private practice for my whole career. I did not specialize in any one area. I had cases of all types, family law cases, civil cases, criminal cases. The only thing that I never got to do that I always wanted to do was to work for a stint in the state's attorney's office. That was my dream when I was in law school. That was what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a career prosecutor, but what I wanted to do was to be a career lawyer and represent people in all kinds of cases, in all stages of life, and in all different kinds of issues. And I got to do that. And I was very, very proud of my work. It gave me the opportunity to do something that was tangible, that I could look back at and say, I did that. And there was great satisfaction in that. I was very happy to be a lawyer. The reason I wanted to become a judge is I got to a point in life where I wanted to give back to my community, not just serve my clients. So that is why I reached out and asked people around me, people who were in positions of influence, to help me streamline my presentation, streamline my resume, round out my experiences as needed to go through the process that Rich and Pam and Liz and I all went through to get that appointment. And so that's what I did.
Thank you, Judge Thompson. Next, I'm going to come to Mr. Adams.
Oh, I'm sorry. There wasn't a 50% chance. It was a 33% chance.
So I'm waiting to be unmuted. Hi, everybody. I am Wes Adams. I am the former state's attorney for Anne Arundel County. It's nice to be back in front of everybody again. I think the last time we were all together, it was in Glen Burnie High School for a state's attorney's candidate forum in 2018. This is my 23rd year of practice. I clerked for a judge my first year out of law school. And then since then, I have served in five different jurisdictions: Montgomery County. I was a prosecutor in Prince George's County and eventually the chief of homicide there. Spent 8 years prosecuting murders in Baltimore City primarily. I went back to Prince George's County and then became elected in Anne Arundel County. And now I serve as the county attorney for Charles County, for the Charles County government, where I am the chief legal advisor for them. Respectfully, I believe that I have the deepest and broadest amount of both criminal trial experience, civil, policy making, administrative law, and really community involvement of any of the candidates before you. I spent the last 4 years, or the 4 years as state's attorney, predominantly moving through the county, working with children, working with families, educating the public on trying to break the school to prison pipeline, trying to keep people out of the criminal justice system, and working with the agency, some of the groups that we have here, the NAACP, Pastor Tillett when he was president then, the Caucus of African American Leaders, in trying to find alternative solutions to incarceration. I believe I'm widely recognized as one of the top homicide prosecutors in the state. And in the course of my 23 years, I've been invited by the National District Attorneys Association, the Maryland judges, various lawyer groups, professional associations, the medical examiners, the FBI, to teach on topics like rules of evidence, expert witness preparation, trial strategy, trial tactics. So the circuit court judge is a trial court position, and I've spent my 23 years in a court effectively. So I believe that given my combination of criminal, civil, administrative experience, and community involvement, I offer the best opportunity as a judge. Thank you, Nike, sorry.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Adams. And last but not least, Judge Alban, please.
Hi, sorry, I got a message. It wasn't letting me unmute. Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. I am Pamela Alban, and I am one of your current sitting judges. And I was honored and greatly humbled when I was appointed by Governor Hogan in September 2018. Prior to becoming a judge, I had a career in public service. I was a prosecutor for over 22 years in this county. I took on some of the most complex and challenging cases in this county. I prosecuted child abuse cases, sex offense cases, domestic violence, and homicide cases. I chose that path with my law degree because it was very important to me to do my very best to make a big difference in the world. I, day in and day out, dedicated myself to giving the most vulnerable of victims a voice and hold the most dangerous of predators accountable in our county. This career taught me to weigh evidence, to consider best interests, and to learn and understand that compassion does have a place in the courtroom. My running mates and friends, Judge Morris, Thompson, and Trunnell, and I all went through a vetting process, a process that tested our experience, our character, and our temperament. Since taking the bench, I have fine-tuned my judicial knowledge in all areas of the law, in family law and civil included. Every day I take the bench. Of these 18 months I've been sitting as a judge, I use my judicial experience, my knowledge of the courtroom, my dedication, and my compassion to best serve the citizens of Anne Arundel County. I thank you very much, all of you, for having us here tonight and giving us this opportunity.
Thank you, Judge Alban. And for the next phase, I'm going to ask questions. We're going to ask two candidates the same question. So question one, I'm going to ask two candidates that question. Then I'm going to head on to question number two. And I'm going to do it randomly. So you have no idea who I'm going to call on. And just another warning. So Latanya, who is our timekeeper, you're going to hear a warning bell at 90 seconds. And then you'll hear another bell when your 2 minutes are up. All right. So for the first question is, what are your views on the need for more diversity on the bench and the manner in which the courts treat members of different races? And you know what, I'm gonna turn it back to you, Judge Alban.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the, thank you very much. I do believe that there is a need for diversity. I think diversity is very important, and I have learned that through dealing, actually through my time and experience as a judge. I've gotten to know Judge Morris and Judge Thompson and Judge Trunnell very well, and we all are very diverse, all in our backgrounds, in our races, in our experiences, both personally and professionally. And I think that balance brings a strength to the bench that is unmatched. And it's very important for the citizens to be served and to be reflected as when they look on the bench and they're looking for someone to help them decide these important issues in their life. It's important for them to be able to see themselves and respect the bench. Diversity helps increase respect for decisions. And I think it gives the world a bigger view. As a prosecutor, I saw all sorts of diverse aspects of life. And as a candidate, I've been throughout the county and seen all sorts of communities and participated in all sorts of communities. And I think that experience and that knowledge of diversity is very important to our bench. And I think it's important to keep it there. The bench is very knowledgeable, or they want to keep it in our forefront. We get training on being aware of diversity and bias and things like that in the courtroom. And so I've taken that training, I've taken my experiences, and I bring those with me to the bench every time I take it and I hear a case.
Thank you so much for your response. And I'm going to ask you the same question, Mr. Adams. We're going to come to you with that about diversity and your views on making sure there's diversity on the bench. As we know, it's a diverse population in Anne Arundel County. So what are your views? We would love to hear from you.
So I think that's a great question. And when I came to the state's attorney's office 6 years ago, one of the major things that I started with was trying to increase the diversity of the state's attorney's office, which was a particular homogenous race. I've served in 3 of the predominantly African-American jurisdictions in the state. Baltimore City, Prince George's County, and now Charles County are all African-American majority jurisdictions. And so understanding the implicit bias from my side of it, from the systematic racism that's been infected into the court system, I specifically sought out prosecutors of color in order to bring in different viewpoints so that we weren't viewing criminal justice through the same lens that had been typical in that office for the last 40 or 60 years. I hired the first African-American deputy state's attorney in the history of the state's attorney's office, Claude Devasty Jones, specifically to help bring a sense of diversity into the decision-making process and the way we evaluated cases. So actually in my entire legal career, except for the 4 years that I have been in, that I was the state's attorney, were outside or in a jurisdiction where I was a part of predominantly the African-American community. That's important because the faith in the criminal justice system and the equal application of the laws is really what makes criminal justice work. When folks don't believe that the laws are being applied accurately or fairly and equally, then they lose faith and they're unwilling to abide by the decisions that are made by the court system. Without that buy-in from the general public and the citizens that we serve, our court system becomes unworkable and ineffective. And so I think it's absolutely necessary to have all of those viewpoints represented in our bench and our judicial system so that folks feel like they're being treated fairly.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adams. And for all of you who are viewing, we know we have viewers who are on Facebook, who are streaming this. Please share this, especially for the residents in Anne Arundel County. Oftentimes we know that so many people go to vote on election day and they have no idea who their judges are. And so this platform is an opportunity provided to you by 5 amazing organizations. They want you to go on election day from your home when you're voting for mail to know who these judges are. And so, Mr. Adams, you brought up a great point when we talk about implicit bias. I'm going to come to you. Well, the next question, let me read the next question, then I'm going to tell you who I'm going to come to next. So have any of you taken any certified courses on implicit bias in the judiciary before or after becoming a judge? And if so, how many hours? And those who are aspiring to be a judge, right? And so I'm going to start with you, Ms. Decesaris. I'm sorry, it's a little tongue twister, but I have it.
It's okay. It's Decesaris. It's an extra CE in there. I have not taken any classes other than participating in Prince George's County. I was a member of the Family Law Task Force, which was predominantly African-American community. And what we did at that task force is we were, as lawyers and with other judges, we try to come up with ideas of how to get the community involved in, especially with family law and having access to the courts, because that wasn't happening. And because there was an opportunity or no opportunity for them to be able to be represented. So what we did was we created some opportunities for free clinics within Prince George's County. Also, what I have been doing is I've been working with the Maryland Volunteer Legal Services to represent minorities, because I noticed that even in Anne Arundel County, you don't see minorities being represented in civil cases. So I do that in a lot of my family law cases to help people like that, because it's not fair to them, because you end up going into court and you don't have representation. So it's very important to me that everybody has an opportunity to be represented. I also participate in the Family Law Clinic in Calvert County, although it's not predominantly African-American, but I do deal with a lot of African-Americans in the Family Law Clinic. And prior to becoming part of those Family Law Clinics, we did in fact take some classes dealing with diversity and making sure that as representatives of the court and as officer of the court, that we treated everybody with the same degree of dignity and respect. And that's what I would do on the bench. And I think that's very important, because I see exactly what Mr. Adams is saying about the systematic racial bias, especially in Anne Arundel County. I've seen it happen in the courtrooms. I've seen it happen in our communities, and it's something that needs to be curtailed. And I think as a judge, for one, I'd have to lead by example and encourage the community and our court system to create opportunities to make sure that everybody has access to the courts, as Mr. Adams had mentioned. Then in regards to criminal cases, I've seen young kids, I've dealt with a lot of young students when I was dealing with students.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if you heard the bell, but you're a little over.
I did not.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Next, I'm going to come to you with Judge Trunnell with the same question. And just talk about, have you taken any courses on, certified courses on implicit bias and share that experience with us, please.
So when I passed the bar in Maryland, that same year I passed the bar in Pennsylvania through a quirk because we could. It was a day they had ultimately had the wrong day for the Maryland State Bar Association. So I ended up taking them both. What came with that was I had to do continuing legal education in Pennsylvania that I didn't have to do in Maryland, 13 hours a year. I was also born and raised in Maryland, and I lived in Prince George's County when I was younger. And it was an interesting dynamic to see where we were when I was in the 70s, when I was in Prince George's County, and where we are today. And sadly, it has not changed as much as I would want it to change. It hasn't changed in a significant manner. As far as the classes I've taken, not only have I taken classes because I had to take continuing legal ed, and I have an interest in social justice and racial justice because of my background. My best friend was an African American when I was a kid, and I also was a prosecutor in Prince George's County, and many of my close friends were African American prosecutors and in law school and since that time. And I've seen the bias in the community, and it's heartbreaking. I mean, I'm one of my closest friends from law school was Rodney Warren, who lost in the election to Paul Harris and Paul Getsky, and his numbers were worse because in predominantly white areas. We have to make a systemic change to treat all people equally. We have to make a systemic change to make sure that we as judges make sure we treat everyone the same in all the cases. And I have taken classes. As far as having it as the judge, I took classes leading up to it, but I've not yet taken a class as a judge. But I am fully aware of implicit bias, and every day I make sure that I do not, that I try to make sure I don't have that affect people negatively. I think I'm done.
Yeah, thank you, Judge Trunnell. All right, so I'm going to go to the next question, and I'm going to again read the question, and then I'll call on the candidate. All right, so please describe your firsthand experiences at dealing with people who are different from you socially, economically, or politically. And so I'm going to come to Judge Morris.
Thank you. Wow, that's a really good question. For me, the firsthand experience would be from the time that I was a small child. I went from the time that I was a child all the way through law school. And frankly, now even as a judge, I have always been in a situation where people were different from me, either racially, socially, economically. I grew up, I was raised by a single mother, and we were working poor. And she worked several jobs because where I grew up, the school system didn't necessarily promote secondary education. So she worked several jobs to make sure I can go to Catholic school. And I was, through high school, I was one of 10 African-American students out of a class of 235. So that experience, I had to really get comfortable in my own skin, comfortable in my race, to be a minority. When I went to college, it was interesting to now be exposed to people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, and having people who had money that I could not even imagine, opportunities that were not previously given to me, just because of the way that I grew up. And the same thing, I had to share the space with them, be confident in myself, and to be able to thrive and not let those differences discourage me from pursuing my dreams, or had it creep into my mindset that I wasn't as good as other people who had more opportunity.
Thank you, Judge Morris. I'm going to come to you, Judge Thompson.
All right.
You had that feeling, didn't you?
I did. Well, I probably come at this with a unique perspective, at least to the other 5 candidates, and that is I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Idaho. And some of you probably looking at me funny now. I'll just give you the thumbnail sketch. When I was born in 1965 and until I left there in about 1985, Idaho was lily white, homogeneous, very, very vanilla. And even from a socioeconomic standpoint, very much vanilla. There were no super wealthy people there. There were no super poor people there. And so when I moved to Maryland after college with my wife, and I moved here actually it's 1987, I said 1985 a minute ago, to work on a master's degree at St. John's College in Annapolis. And we rented a little apartment right off West Street on Monroe Court. And there was a barbershop on West Street back then. I don't know if some of you will remember it, but it was called Chambers Brothers. And it was walking distance. I mean, it was literally not, more than about 100 feet from where I lived. And so I walked down there and took a number and sat down and got my hair cut there. And they were kind of freaked out at first because they didn't have a lot of white customers, oh, by the way, I will just point out for the record, in 1987 and until about 1997, I had hair and actually needed haircuts. That changed at some point. But so we lived there for several years and I had my hair cut there. I was very comfortable there. And really, I guess the advantage, or maybe it was a disadvantage that I had growing up in kind of a homogenous place, was that I didn't have any reason to treat anyone any differently. I just took everybody at face value, and I made a lot of long-lasting friends at that barbershop. At that same time, I was working at the Capital newspaper, and a lot of my coworkers were African American. And again, never thought of it, never bothered me, never realized it wasn't how life was supposed to be. So I'm going to hearken back to something that Judge Trunnell said a minute ago. That is how life should be. And we need to work on it to get from where we are to that place where we can all be brothers and sisters. And I feel very strongly about that. So I'm not going to maybe take up all the time, but I think sometimes it's better to just say what's on your mind and not try to stretch it out to take up all the time. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Judge Thompson. And so I'm going to come back to you, Judge Trunnell, because I appreciate how you mentioned, you sharing experience about your best friend and some of the things that your best friend may have experienced that you may not have experienced. But then I also want to talk about you being a sitting judge. You get the opportunity to see the courtroom and how some of the individuals who are coming there, you may see them are a lot younger. And so the question that we bring before you tonight is, what do you believe is the root cause for the high number of juvenile offenders? And what changes can the court system make to reduce these numbers?
God, that's a sad question, because so I was on the Family and Juvenile Council of the Maryland State Bar Association. The reason I joined wasn't because I was a family law member. It was because of my juvenile justice background. Not only was I a juvenile prosecutor and an adult prosecutor, I did it as a defense attorney, but I actually, to a certain extent, was not the most well-behaved of children. I'm the first college graduate in my family, and my mom got pregnant with me in high school. I was what you would call somewhat of a child delinquent. Having said that, I really looked back and tried to put together, and I've written articles for the Maryland State Bar Association about juvenile justice, and I absolutely think that what happens with juvenile justice is it starts before they're delinquents. If a child becomes a delinquent, the system has already failed that child. We need to get services to the to communities of need when the children are 1 year old. We have to have daycare. We have to have pre-K. We have to have a system in place where all parts of the community come together to help young children. Because by the time they become delinquent, and if you look at delinquents and you look at adult criminals, most of them should have had IEPs. They should have had educational opportunities that they did not receive. We start the process early. There's a guy in Baltimore City called James Piper Bond, who's doing all kinds of things in the Baltimore and Prince George's County community to help children in need to get the services they need before they get to delinquency, to the delinquency stage. But once we get to that stage, we can still do things. There's a lot of issues with drug addiction. We have done great things. The court has done great things with regard to drug courts and the like. But it really starts at the beginning. We need to start earlier in life. It is a systemic societal problem that the bias against children in need and the lack of services that children get do not make for children who will become happy, successful adults. And we really need to start at a much earlier age. But from a court system, we have to have the compassion, but we also need to make sure that there is a certain part of the system where if it's violent crime, there has to be some level of retribution from the court system. It is, but we really need to do this at an earlier stage, not at a later stage. And that will make it so that that will make the best bang for the buck for the society.
All right, thank you, Judge Trunnell. And for those who don't know, he's speaking of Living Classrooms. That's the name of the organization that Mr. Bond is the CEO of. All right, so I'm going to come to you, Ms. Decesaris, and you are a school teacher, right? And so you got to see firsthand being in the school system and seeing these juveniles. So let's talk about that. And so
I did. Unfortunately, I did. I taught at Parsonsville High School and Benjamin Stoddard and J. Gardner Shugart in Prince George's County, inside the Beltway. And I want to do mention what Judge Morris says about being socioeconomic. The majority of my students that were 95% African American. And what I found that, some of these kids were being passed over. I was dealing with them when they were in middle school and high school, and they were passed over way before then. And I agree with Judge Trunnell. It needs to start early. So what was happening, a lot of my students were coming to me and saying, Mr. Decesaris, I'm getting in trouble because of this, this, and that. And a lot of them were coming from single family homes. And it was a socioeconomic thing, but it was also because these children were not getting what they needed at a very young age. So by the time I had them in my classroom, I tried to instill in them, some self-worth, that they were worthy of anything that anybody else in the community was getting, and that they needed to speak up for themselves. Unfortunately, there were some kids that weren't able to do that. But there were a whole lot of students that I had that were able to do that. And as a matter of fact, I'm very close to a whole lot of them even today after I stopped teaching 6 years in, because I did stop because there was a student who was killed on campus. And then my brother-in-law was killed in the line of duty in Prince George's County. So I did stop teaching at that point. But as of today, I am still friends with some of my students, and they have been successful. They are deputy sheriffs. They are CEOs of companies. And I'd like to say that because they were students, I was a positive influence on them. But again, as Judge Trunnell said, it's got to start really early.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your student and your brother-in-law. So the next question, I'm going to come to Mr. Adams. And so I want to talk, and oftentimes, and I don't want to say we live with regrets or play Monday morning football, as some would say, but I want to ask you a question and about, sometimes we get the opportunity to rethink some things or wish we had done things differently. So I want to ask you, do you ever wake up in the middle of the night, or have you ever woken up in the middle of the night and thought about a case, wishing you had done things or handled it differently? And if so, please describe the situation to the extent in which you can describe it, because we know there are certain things you cannot disclose, right?
Wow. That's a really hard question, because looking back on my career, I spent a lot of time prosecuting really violent offenders, predominantly murders and vehicular manslaughters and stuff like that. And so I had a lot of emphasis on, accountability, because these were people that were hurting the community. And as an experience that Judge Trunnell and I can both share, we had the Crofton Noose case that came into Anne Arundel County, where they hung a noose at the middle school, the Crofton Middle School. I have to tip my hat to Judge Trunnell on that one, because he and I worked together. We enlisted some help from Pastor Tillett to create an alternative to incarceration. We both recognized that, a 15 or 20-day sentence wasn't going to affect the community or the societal change. The regret that I have was not being able to persuade the judge in the second case, when we took the second case to trial, and not being able to find a resolution that worked, that wasn't confrontational, but that somehow advanced the broader goal of the community justice that I was trying to seek, and that Rich and I were able to put together with his particular client. I look back and I've had opportunities to dismiss cases because there was no evidence after somebody was charged, to rethink cases, to in Baltimore City, quite on 3 separate occasions, I had murder defendants that I eventually exonerated and dismissed their cases because the initial evidence didn't add up. So it's hard for me to look back at a case like it and undo or think of a different way to undo it.
Got it. All right. Thank you. That was the bell for the time.
I think Latanya popped up on my screen when she rang, so
okay, good.
I got a visual cue. I didn't hear it, but I got the visual cue.
I thought I heard it, right? So thank you all for working through us. I know the bell for some, it's more prominent than others. And thank you for, for your honesty. It's not an easy question. And so I'm going to come to you, Judge Morris, with the same question and ask you about if you've had, something that kept you up at night, or thought you or wish you had handled a case differently, to the extent in which you can share.
Yeah, I can keep the people anonymous. So early in my career, I represented victims of domestic violence in protective orders, and also in helping them get divorces, but mainly protective orders. And that was 17, 18 years ago, and each one of those cases still stay with me. And the ones that stay with me are the losses. Someone who I felt needed protection from abuse from the court. And typically, if it's a situation where it's a contested case, that it might be a situation where a judge is not convinced that we met our burden of proof. And there was one particular woman who I still think about, who was a Nigerian woman. I represented her. She came over from this country. She was economically dependent on her spouse. He, kept her from becoming a citizen, just so he can keep a tight rein on her. And he did some pretty horrific things. And the problem was that she did not come forward when she had the black eye, when she had the bruises. She came forward later on when there were just threats. And in that particular case, we did not get the protective order for her. So I was disappointed, and I was scared for her, because without the protective order, it meant she was going back home. So fortunately, and just in conclusion, fortunately, we were able to work with our partners, our justice partners, to get her out of that situation and send her across the country, where she was able to petition for citizenship without her husband.
Thank you for that. And I just want to, bring light to, even now in the midst of a pandemic, so many more people are at home with people that they are experiencing more domestic violence cases. So for those of you who are watching and maybe experiencing that, and, there's help, and seek help, and there are resources that are available for those individuals. So thank you for mentioning that, Judge Morris, because that's something that's very prominent. So I'm going to go to the next question. My next question, and I'm going to come to you, Judge Alban. I see you down there, so I'm going to ask you the question. So this question, in the vetting process of the Anne Arundel County Judicial Nominating Commission, were you asked any questions about race relations? And if so, could you talk about that with us?
Yes, the answer is yes. We were asked race questions. We were vetted by some minority law bar associations. We were vetted by the Hispanic Bar Association. We were vetted by the Monumental Bar Association and the Black Women's Alliance Bar Association, as well as the LGBTQ Bar Association as well. They were very interested on how, as a judge, we would handle various situations. In particular, one situation I remember by the Hispanic Bar Association, they were curious as to whether we would take deportation consequences into account when we were deciding whether or not to impose sentences. Others were, how would you treat if you saw unfairness occurring in the courtroom, and how you would specifically apply family law situations to maybe homosexual relationships, those kinds of things. So we were definitely vetted, and we were definitely asked if we would be aware of it, if we would take it into account, and in which situations would it make a difference to you?
Thank you, Judge Alban. And Judge Thompson, I'm going to ask you the same question.
I'm sorry, I'm going to turn on a light.
I will second everything that Judge Alban just said. One of the questions that came up when I was interviewing with, I believe it was the Alliance of Black Women Attorneys, they said, all right, so imagine that you're a judge. What will you do to improve diversity in Anne Arundel County? And I started this career as a law clerk. I know Rich was a law clerk, Liz was a law clerk, Wes was a law clerk. That's pretty much how you start this. Annette was a law clerk too, apparently. That's pretty much how you start this as an apprentice. More and more, I'm a graduate of the University of Baltimore, more and more African Americans make up the law school class now at the University of Baltimore than they did when I was there, that's for sure. And judges, I think, in counties like this need to be particularly tuned in to giving African-American law students the opportunity to start this career the way we did in the apprenticeship that we have known as clerkships. That way they get to know the inside at the courthouse. They get to know where the bodies are buried, so to speak. Or where the Post-it notes are kept. That's always more important to me than where the bodies are buried. And they network and they get the chance to meet people. And that networking thing is usually what ends up in the first job as a lawyer. You might get hired by the state's attorney's office who's downstairs in the courthouse, or you might get hired by a lawyer whose office is across the street who met you when you were in your clerkship. And quite candidly, that's how I got my first lawyer job, by meeting somebody in the courthouse and networking. And so we need to be particularly tuned in as judges to giving people that chance, people who have traditionally been underserved and not had the opportunities. I think part of what we owe our community as a way of giving back, to say thank you for putting us in these positions of power and responsibility, is to give back in that way and bring people with us. So that's my approach. Now, I haven't been able to do that just yet. I'm going to be completely transparent with you. When Liz, Pam, and I started, I think Pam and I picked up law clerks who had already been in the building. Liz hired from the outside, and she went with an African-American young man whose name is Jordan and has given him a great opportunity. That's on my to-do list. I heard a bell. That was the first time.
All right, thank you, Judge Thompson. And so now I'm excited to turn it over to my co-moderator. And many of you know Mr. Torrey Snow, and I like to call him the closer. So he's going to close this thing out. And ladies and gentlemen and judges and Mr. Torrey Snow.
Good evening, everyone. I am Torrey Snow, and it is a huge opportunity and a privilege to be with you. I don't take it for granted. Many of you are familiar with me. You kind of know we may have different ideas about politics in some cases, but I don't take for granted that we are here united to get the best outcomes for this judge election. So thank you, Antonio, and to all of the organizations for putting this event together and allowing me as the president of the Frederick Douglass Foundation to be a part of that discussion. I also want to point out to Judge Thompson that I am a fellow Idahoan, so it's not something you hear all the time. So, but that's wonderful. Let's get right into the questions. Our next question is actually going to be a little educational. Not many people are really into the weeds of politics, but there's a term going around called sentence disparity. And we know that there's sentencing disparity in criminal cases. And I'm curious to hear if you have dealt with it, or if it's been something that you've been a part of. And if you could just provide in the couple of minutes that you have, provide a brief description of what that issue is and how you have been impacted by it. And we'll go to Judge Trunnell first.
So when I was a young attorney, I had to go to Baltimore City, Patapsco Avenue, and I had a young white woman on a DUI, and the fact pattern was the exact same fact pattern as it was with I remember his age. He was a 46-year-old African-American male, DUI, same thing. And they were treated differently than the other one. And having come from a diverse community of Prince George's County, having prosecuted in Prince George's County, it was mind-boggling to me, and it was devastating to me that was what happened in that case. And I tried to do something about it. I talked to the public defenders, the deputy public defender, about it when I walked out of the courtroom because I was so appalled by it. And I have seen it. I would say that having been a prosecutor in Prince George's County, we didn't see it as much as you would see at other places. I think there's an effort in Anne Arundel County as we speak to not have that happen. I do believe that we absolutely need more training in implicit biases. My friend Rodney Warren, early in our career, we both went to law school together and were friends. And ultimately, after he lost the judicial election, after he was appointed by the governor to Judge Harris and Judge Getsky, we talked over the years, we talked about racial justice. And he helped me understand that it's not just judges who are implicit biases affect African Americans and people of minorities. It's also jurors. And it's not just judges who have to make the change and have to make sure their implicit biases don't get them in trouble or don't cause them to be unfair, but we have to figure out a way to make jurors fair. And once again, that's a societal issue we have to deal with. When we had the death penalty is predominant, is ultimately found against African Americans per capita more than white people.
Right.
And,
thank you.
It's jurors a lot of times that do that, and we need to make that change. Thank you
so much. No problem. And let's ask the same question to Mr. Adams. What's been your experience? Can you explain sentencing disparity and your experiences with sentencing disparity?
Certainly. Hi, Tori. How are you? It's like Judge Trump said, when you're in the trenches looking at your court cases, it's hard to see your individual case stacked up against other cases because it's rare that you get the same exact case, the same exact defendant. Pastor Offer from Harvest Crusade posted today, actually on Facebook, about two armed robbers, a young white defendant, a young black defendant, both in the same courtroom, both armed robbery. They showed both of their sentencing offense scores in this particular jurisdiction. They both had 138.5, which meant they had similar backgrounds, similar histories, all of those things wrapped up into one. same judge, same courtroom, same day, one walked out with 2 years and one walked out with 26. And you look at that, and in Maryland, we've tried to create systems to help address that particular problem with our sentencing guidelines and keeping sentences inside of guidelines. And it's to help provide a framework so that when people do come in with similar offense scores and similar backgrounds and criminal histories, that they are treated similarly. Because, again, to me, the problem of disparate treatment is that one segment of the population could start to lose faith in the criminal justice system. And, when folks start to lose faith in the system, it breaks down. And so for me, what I have seen, the best firsthand experience that I have seen is really in the way we handled the Crofton News case, where one judge helped find a solution and one judge helped not find a solution, ultimately resulting in us having to go to the legislature, worked with Delegate Chang and Delegate Sidnor to bring about a change in the law itself. I felt very strongly that we had a prosecutable case inside of the current structural language of the law.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Adams. Appreciate it. And that's time. The next question is actually going to be for Judge Thompson. And I guess the question is, can you describe to us the racial composition of your staff and your chambers or your office in whatever context you're currently operating from? And then have you made any commitments or set any targets for diversity in your staff? And we'll ask Judge Thompson that question.
Well, in the circuit court, in the circuit court, we have a staff of 3, a law clerk and an admin and the judge. My admin is Caucasian. My law clerk is Caucasian as well. I think I answered in the previous question that it is my intention to bring along some others from underserved communities, African Americans, Hispanics, etc. And I think that is my duty. That is something that I need to do to give back, to pass along the opportunities that I've benefited from to others. Now, as far as my admin is concerned, I inherited her from a senior judge, and it is my intention to keep her as long as she'll stay. That may not be something that I get to change, at least right away. But law clerks, you have my commitment that I will be doing that in the future. I just wanted to say something about sentencing disparity while I have a couple of seconds left. So often, sentencing disparities happen because of the background of the individual defendant. And I think Judge Trunnell mentioned something about this earlier. Systemically, we underserve minority and African American youth to the point where they're in the system early on, and they never get the treatment that they need to get out of the system. So their criminal involvement goes from one thing to the next and the next and the next, and they carry that chain behind them. And so when they're in their 20s and they have committed some crime, a judge looks back at that whole history. So I think to solve this problem, yes, we need to be aware of our implicit bias. Yes, we need to be aware that we need to treat all criminal defendants the same. But we need to start serving the people at a much younger age, the juvenile offenders.
Thank you.
Children in high school, etc. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your response and excellent answers, both of you. Thank you. Our next question actually is going to shift gears a little bit, and it may sound familiar, similar to a previously asked question, but I do want to, we asked a bit about implicit bias training and some courses you might have taken, but I'm curious, in the context of your own experience, what steps have you taken to better, actually, I'm sorry, I have to ask the last question to Ms. Decesaris. I apologize. I did not mean to skip over you. Ms. Decesaris, can you describe the racial composition of your staff, either in your current or prior role And how do you plan to diversify your staff in the future? I do apologize. I didn't mean to skip past you.
It's okay, sir. I appreciate it. Actually, I only have one assistant, and she's been with me for 15 years, and I inherited her too from a law office in Prince George's County. She is Caucasian, and I have another young man who I became his legal guardian because his parents decided that they didn't want him while we were in court, and I volunteered to take him while we were in court in Anne Arundel County. And he is also Caucasian. So I only have really 2 staff members. But I agree with the other judges, the judges who mentioned about our opportunity to become law clerks. When I clerked in Prince George's County, I know that there were a lot of my colleagues there as law clerks were African American, and we all worked together and we collaborated together, and we all worked for the judges together, and we tried so that everybody was treated in a way with respect and dignity, because some of those law clerks were not, by just personnel in the courthouse. But things have changed a lot in Prince George's County since then. I'm now well, it's only been about 23 years because I was doing this teaching in Prince George's County first. So at this time, my staff is such that it's not even that big to, make any changes. But if I do become a judge, I will be looking for disadvantaged students from law schools, and I will make a commitment to have a minority law clerk, because I agree, because that what the one judge said is that is your link to becoming networked, to get involved in the community, and to get the benefit of learning how the courthouse works.
Thank you so much, Ms. Decesaris. And we are going to head to our next question, which is actually going to be for Judge Morris. And this question, it really centers on the steps that you might have taken to understand the role of racial disparities and implicit bias, specifically here in Anne Arundel County in the last 2 years. And so can you describe to us what steps you've taken to better understand the issue and how you've tried to manage that matter here in Anne Arundel County in the last 2 years? And we'll start with you, Judge Morris.
Yes. Well, within the last 2 years ago, prior to becoming a judge, I actually worked at the National Security Agency, which is in Anne Arundel County. And the agency was very, the issue of implicit bias was very important to the leadership in the agency. And they had all personnel take a series of trainings to address the issues of implicit bias, to understand what it is, to understand how it creeps into decisions, whether it's promotion, for different positions within the agency. And so that was the first, I would say, formalized training in dealing with the issue of implicit bias. Once I became a judge, one of the things that we go through as judges, as new judges, is a new trial judges orientation, which is a different curriculum and making a transition from becoming a practicing attorney to a judge. And there were implicit bias training as well, specifically as a jurist, you had to take that training. One of the things in learning, and then also specifically in Anne Arundel County, what has been helpful is as a judicial candidate, I've been going out in the community and getting to know the community as a public servant and really listening to people and their concerns about what they have, like through the judicial system, their experiences, their concerns, their complaints. So when I'm presiding over cases, I'm aware of the different concerns of the citizens of Anne Arundel County. And one of the things that I've done specifically that was great advice that was given to me is that when you make a decision, before you make a final decision, flip the facts around in your mind, make the male a woman, switch races. And is it a situation that you would have the same result? And that helps identify, whether or not your implicit bias, well, specifically my implicit biases are creeping in.
Thank you so much, Judge Morris. And we'll ask the same question of you, Judge Alban.
Okay. I'm a little differently situated than Judge Morris. My career has been absolutely entrenched in the Anne Arundel County judicial system. I had a front row seat from day one of whenever I started practicing once I got sworn in. There has been changes and advancements in Anne Arundel County. When I first became an attorney, the bench was almost all white men. Judge North was the first female judge sworn in while I was there, and then Judge Green came on. So, and now the bench is more diverse. There's more women than men on the bench. So I think that's one thing that I have seen since I've been, since my career has started, is that diversity has helped, I think, bring implicit bias more. When I started in a district court, I was treated very differently than my male counterpart. There was an old boy network that as a woman I had to deal with. And so that certainly opened me up to some sensitivity. I understand that's gender, it's not race. But very early on in my career as a prosecutor, I was a community prosecutor. I was assigned to the Eastport Terrace community. As a community prosecutor, what I did was I went and I had meetings at the community center. I met with juvenile justice workers and probation agents and police officers who regularly patrolled. We worked and we talked to community members when we were out there. And I had exposure to a whole different experience than what I had grown up with. And I realized how different the lives were for some of the residents there and the challenges that they faced. So I brought that with me. I'll never forget, when I was out there, I had my first homicide case assigned to me, and I met with the victim's mother, and she said to me she was always worried about her son. She worried whether he would end up dead on the street or whether he would end up in jail, and how she was so sad because if he had been in jail, at least she could have visited him. So those are experiences that I keep with me and I take with me every day. I have
Thank you so much. Thank you. Sorry, we're out of time.
Sorry, I couldn't hear the bell. I apologize.
It's okay. No problem. Here to help. Let's actually shift to our next question. And this actually, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about diversion programs. And I'm wondering if Ms. Decesaris, I think I pronounced that right, can you explain the proper use of diversion programs and what's appropriate and an inappropriate use of these types of programs?
Sure, and it's actually Decesaris, but it was close. Thank you, sir. It's all right, it's that extra syllable. I believe in diversion programs tremendously, especially with the drug court and the veteran court, and especially with young offenders. I think that young offenders need to stay out of the jail system. I did a column in the Capital Gazette where I said that we can't just warehouse young offenders, especially those of color, because we know, we all admit it, that it's usually those of color that end up in those jails being warehoused. So diversion programs need to start at a very young age. And I think it's important that we teach our communities, in a sense, and especially our schools, to be able to tell our students, listen, this is what you need to do to become successful. In regards to once you get to the court system, we need, if we're on the bench, we need to collaborate with the community, with other leaders in the community, so that we could come up with ideas to avoid sending young people to jail. Because as we all know, once you get caught in that system, you're not getting out for a long time. And if, even with drug court, I've seen a lot of drug court cases. I've not been directly involved in, but I sat in a courtroom. And I would tell you, in Anne Arundel County, I've seen Caucasian defendants, the ones that are pushed to go into the drug court, as opposed to African-American defendants. And I would sit in a courtroom and listen to that and just be so disturbed, because it needs to be everybody involved. It needs to be available to all defendants. And again, we can't just warehouse young people, especially those of color. And I heard the bell.
Thank you so much, Ms. Decesaris.
Thank you.
And Mr. Adams, can you talk a bit about diversion programs and what their appropriate or inappropriate use is?
Certainly. Thank you, Tori. As many of you know, I actually started the Veterans Court in Anne Arundel County. I was part of the collaborating group that worked with the judiciary to create our Safe Stations program. I helped double the size of our drug court diversion program from the state's attorney side, because look, long-term crime solutions are really about addressing the root cause of criminal behavior. And the diversion court, the whole role of the diversion court model is to seek out the behavior that's actually leading to criminal activity and help address it, whether it's a mental health issue, whether it's an addiction issue, whether it's a lack of job training skills issue, or an education issue. And you see judges try to fashion, even in their own sentencing schemes, ideas about getting your high school equivalency diploma or getting some job skills, so that when and if your time in the criminal justice system is finished, you can go out and model behavior that's different than what got you there in the first place. The purpose of those diversion programs is to create the behavioral foundation to stay out of the criminal justice system. For me, as the state's attorney, those were a large portion of the policy initiatives that I engaged in. The second piece of that was working in the school system, because as many of us have mentioned, we recognize that there must be early intervention. So working with kids as low as 5th, 6th, 7th grade to get in there and address conceptually what could lead to criminal behavior and end up getting them in there in the first place. Because once they get in, the cycle repeats itself over and over again. The third piece I'll add is, I'm on the board of the court-appointed special advocates, and we deal with abused and neglected kids. One of the things that we found is having a CASA in those circumstances, and a CASA is a court-appointed special advocate that works directly with a child who's in the system, helps reduce criminal involvement by 2/3 and keeps them out of the system in the first place. So I'm a big fan of diversion.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adams. And we're going to move to our next question, which is again a bit of a topic shift and a little personal, but we're curious to know what vetting processes have you gone through in recent years that can assure voters that you have no history of discrimination or personal inappropriate conduct? And we'll go to Judge Morris.
Well, that's a very interesting question. I'm smiling because even though we've mentioned the vetting process for judge, my job immediately before judge was working at the National Security Agency. And no disrespect to the vetting process that we went through to become judges, which deals with our temperament, our background, the investigation through the National Security Agency, which includes a polygraph test, delved very deep into my background as far as making sure there wasn't anything inappropriate and that it was worthy to serve the citizens of the United States in that position. In addition, going through the Judicial Nominating Commission, when we fill out the application, first we start with an application. It's a 30-page application that goes into every part of our life. And in addition to that, that application is forwarded to 17 different bar associations who review that. And we go before the different bar associations' judicial nominating committees who will interview us, and they'll conduct their own investigation with opposing counsel to make sure you knew how to treat opposing counsel well. They don't just rely on the references that you give them, they go above and beyond. I know for me, again, because my practice was throughout the state when I worked at the AG's office, they called people well out of Anne Arundel County. And that process was repeated throughout throughout each phase. Was that time or is that 30 seconds?
30 seconds.
Okay, so that was included in the committees, the Judicial Nominating Commission, and then again, the governor, in order to be interviewed by him, his office conducted its own investigation of my background, again, without necessarily relying on the references that I provided.
Thank you so much, Judge Morris. And same question for you, Judge Alban.
Well, my answer isn't going to be very interesting because I went through the same process Judge Morris did, except for the national security. So I wish I could give you more information, but I went through the same application process. I went through the same interview process with various bar associations, with the Judicial Nominating Commission, and I was vetted. And I do know that they do speak to your opponents. They spoke to my boss. They spoke to my colleagues, my coworkers. They spoke with the judges I appeared before regularly. They spoke to my opponents. The head public defender was one of my references because it showed my civility that I always brought within to the court. They checked and learned about my work ethic. They learned about the character and how I treated everybody, whether it was an unrepresented defendant or whether it was a victim. So that's what I did. It's the same process. So I might as well not keep talking.
Well, thank you so much for that. And actually, if the team doesn't mind, I would actually like to pose this question to both Ms. Decesaris and Mr. Adams, because there's probably a different process. So
Yes.
We'll start with you, Ms. Decesaris. In 1 minute, can you maybe speak to this question about vetting that you have gone through for your history? Oh, the microphone might need to be unmuted. We're a little bit out of routine, so. Ms. Decesaris, unmute your microphone. I see you talking. There you go. Oh.
And I haven't started time yet, so because I want her to unmute.
Okay, I did in fact apply to become a judge back in 2016. I went through the same vetting process that the judges that are currently sitting went through. I went and met with all of the 16, 17 bar associations that they did. I went through the same vetting process that they did. Unfortunately, when I got to the Judicial Nominating Commission, they decided that, you know, they vote for so many, and my name was not sent up. So I was highly vetted, just like they were. I did a 30-page application. I did all of those things that they did. So it's, you know, who gets the most votes from the Judicial Nominating Commission that makes the difference. And again, you know, if I'm going to say this, and some people are going to be angry at me, but it's very political, just like this election has become.
Ms. Decesaris, thank you so much. And Mr. Adams, would you kindly speak to the vetting processes that you have gone through prior to this point?
Well, I've gone through a vetting process of 560,000 Anne Arundel County residents on 2 separate occasions. I also went through the judicial nominating process, filled out the judicial application as well. Like Ms. Morris, I was interviewed and had my background torn apart by DC-3, the Air Force, in application for a chief legal counsel position there. And my background was completely vetted by them. I was not offered the position, but was mostly out of qualification, a different subject matter. When I went down to Charles County, again, I had 5 separate, the 5 commissioners, I filled out my application, my background check, my criminal history, my political background, everything was vetted by the 5 commissioners down in Charles County. And so I've been through vetting processes. I've been hired by Baltimore City, Anne Arundel County, Prince George's County, and now Charles. And each time I've been vetted.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adams. And I do appreciate the flexibility of our timekeepers on that. Sorry for throwing that curveball at you. Our next question is actually going to be for Judge Thompson. And I would be interested to have you elaborate on what you feel a good balance is between justice and accountability. This comes into place when you're thinking about whether you're going to focus on punishing an offender or rehabilitating an offender. How do you make that balance, and what do you feel is a good balance when making those types of judgment calls? And Judge Thompson, what are your thoughts?
Well, the balance between punishment and rehabilitation is something that you do on a case-by-case basis, so there's not really a formula. I will tell you that philosophically, my standpoint is that nearly everyone should have the opportunity to be rehabilitated. When we sentence somebody, pick a crime. Let's say it's a second-degree assault. The guideline, or the upper limit, it would be 10 years. Well, nobody's going to get 10 years unless, you know, they've got a long list of stuff behind that. But you find some way to give them enough time in punishment so that they take it seriously, but then you craft the probation, and then this is something that I wanted to talk about when we were talking about diversion. You know, drug court, veterans court, those kind of things are great, and they really are great. But that's not reinventing the wheel. We've been doing probation forever. You give them enough probation so that they have an opportunity to fix whatever's wrong, get treatment, get drug treatment, etc. And then there's a sentence hanging over their head because you've suspended part of it. So you say, okay, I'm going to give you 2 years in jail. I'm going to suspend all but 4 months. They go to jail for 4 months, then they come out, they're on probation, and they're supposed to be working. Now, when I have that talk at the end of a sentencing with the criminal defendant, I usually tell him or her, look, I want you to succeed. When you get out into probation, I want you to be successful. These are the steps that you're going to have to take to be a productive part of our community, because that's what we want. So that's my approach in every case. In every case, it's a little different, Tori, because every case has its own unique facts. Every case has its own unique defendant. And so it has to be done on a case-by-case basis, but that's my philosophical underpinning.
Thank you so much, Judge Thompson. And Judge Trunnell, would you kindly respond to the question, how do you balance punishment versus rehabilitation when making decisions?
Well, there are two factors that come into play when you talk about rehabilitation versus punishment. And one is recidivism, and one is the violence of the crime. And I think that you're in a situation where the more violent the crime is, the society there has to be deterrent to it when you have violent crime. Also recidivism. People deserve second chances if the crime is not heinous. They deserve a chance to make it out and be a productive member of society. One of the reasons we have probation before judgments is so that we can't, and then for some of you don't know what that is, probation before judgments are where we can strike the finding of guilt after a while. For offenders who are not having very serious crimes, we can offer them at one point probation before judgment, which means they get to strike it from their record. Because a lot of times what we have is once you get a criminal record, it makes it difficult for you to get a job. It makes it difficult for you to earn a living. So we have to take that into account, especially with young and offenders who aren't violent and offenders who have the ability to be rehabilitated. We need to try to rehabilitate those people. We can't put forth a generation of convicts. It doesn't help society at all in that regard. I think the other thing you have to look at is you have to look at, like Judge Thompson said, you have to start with X. Maybe a little bit of punishment is in order, but give them the chance when that's over with and be on probation to make it so that A, they not have to go back to jail, B, they don't continue to commit crimes, and C, maybe they get the possibility of having the conviction stricken. And it has to do with it's a spectrum from where you are in the criminal justice system as far as your record, combined with how bad the crime is. And we should always, and I think what drug courts do, one of the things that's nice about our drug court in Anne Arundel County is that it gives you a chance to have very intense supervision with the understanding at the end of it, you can get out if you get, if you do what the program has you do.
Thank you.
And ultimately, let me say, ultimately, it's only for nonviolent offenders, that one is.
Thank you so much, Judge Trunnell. And this actually concludes our pre-selected set of questions that we've asked. Thank you so much for your cooperation, for your flexibility with our time. We're actually going to transition to a new phase in which we are collecting questions from the dozens of folks that are watching this discussion live on Facebook. And I believe if I recall the instructions correctly, we're going to ask the question, we'll pose the question, and if you'd like to respond to it, there is a raise hand feature that will assist our timekeepers in giving you an opportunity to speak. As I understand, for each question, so that we can get through a number of the questions, we will get just a couple of respondents and try to get through as many questions as we can. And so I will try to keep track of who's responding to who, and I'll try to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to respond to the different questions. So the first question that we've received actually goes referring to drugs. It says that drugs are killing our community. I work closely with the Annapolis Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition and Sorority Sisters here in Annapolis to prevent misuse and abuse. What have you done, or what are you doing to help break the cycle? Jail time doesn't solve the problem, crisis / epidemic. So Judge Alban, your hand is raised. Judge Alban, how would you like to respond to that?
Mute. Sorry. Hi. What I have done, I have one of the great privileges of being a backup judge in our drug court program. So I am part of that fantastic diversion court in which I get to work with offenders on a almost weekly basis, and where they come in and they check, and they get checked in, they have people working with them, getting them into treatment, getting them life skills, getting them housing, getting them jobs. They're testing them to make sure they're not using. They're providing counseling when they need it. There's also punishment when they're not doing what they should. So I've been very fortunate to be able to be part of that system and to dedicate some of my time on the bench as a judge to be part of addressing the problem through the drug court system.
Thank you so much, Judge Alban. And I also didn't mention, for these questions, we are looking for 1-minute responses or less if possible, so we can get through as many. And I'm sure you guys would like to make your voice heard on a number of issues. So I saw, it seems like we're having a technical difficulty issue with the raise hand feature. So we'll have to go a little old school, and you have to physically raise your hand, and I'll see it and we'll call on you. And I did see Mr. Adams' hand. So Mr. Adams, how would you like to respond to this question?
Well, thank you, Tori. With respect to what I've done is I actually helped create the Safe Stations program in Anne Arundel County, which was literally an alternative to incarceration program that was quashing subpoenas and open warrants to get folks suffering from addiction directly into treatment before they even ever saw the court system, so that they were addressing their addiction issues and then going in because they would have a cleaner mind, they would be physically recovered, would have better results in our criminal justice system. Additionally, I helped, that was a minute already?
Yeah. I think that was 30 seconds.
Okay, I helped double the size of our drug court system in the circuit court level to help more people. My drug court coordinator actually went out and recruited a diverse membership inside of our drug court system. And finally, I actually sit on the board of Serenity Sisters now, which is transitional housing to help people in long-term recovery. And so really we're doing very well with beds and short-term recovery. Our next frontier for this particular situation is the next 18 months to develop behavioral modification skills to keep them out of addiction in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. And our next question is, can you discuss your positions on violent / property crimes and crimes of non-aggression that don't harm or affect other people? We're thinking about things like drug possession, gun possession, versus using the gun in a commission of another crime. Who would like to respond to that question? Crimes of violence versus non-violent crimes.
Annette keeps raising her hand.
Oh, I don't. Oh, all right, Annette, go ahead. Ms. Decesaris.
Gotta unmute.
I think she's the only one of us left that's muted.
What? I'm okay. The host muted me. You there?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me. So in regards to nonviolent offenders, you know, as a judge, if were elected, I do believe that as Judge Trunnell had mentioned before, we should be looking for judgment before, probation before judgment. And I do that a lot with my clients. And if I'm in the district court, I don't represent many clients in the criminal court, but I ask for that judgment before probation. The probation before judgment, so that they can get the help they need. And that's something that I would do as a judge, because I think that nonviolent offenders need to have some kind of education. They need to get therapy. They need to also be able to have an opportunity to rehabilitate themselves. And I think we need to have community services that allow them to do that. And I think it's important that we don't, like I mentioned earlier, we don't warehouse offenders that are nonviolent, and that they do have some redeeming qualities, and that they do get an opportunity to be part of the community and function in our community.
Thank you, Ms. Decesaris. Is there anyone else that would like to respond to that question? I'm checking. I don't see any hands. All right, let's move on to the next question. This question is, what are your opinions on racial profiling, and how do you think it should be addressed with police departments? What are your opinions on racial profiling, and how should it be addressed with police departments?
Sure, I'll take that.
Sure, thanks. Thank you, Judge Trunnell.
So I can't fathom, as a white male, I can't fathom being in a car or being in a store as an African American and being profiled. It is abhorrent to my belief in equal justice. Because of the color of your skin, you are profiled is offensive to me. And I think what has to happen is, I do think there's a step forward when we do body cams. I think body cams are important that we have those. We need to know, we have to have police departments that have programs in place that do not profile anyone because of their race, because of what appears to be their religious background, and only do their job when they actually see crimes committed. And we have, it's a police issue, but it's a police issue that we as judges have to take serious as well, because this can't be how our society operates. It is offensive to human rights.
Thank you so much, Judge Trunnell. And does anyone else want to respond to that? I don't see any hands. All right, our next question is going to be, this is a good one. How does a judge balance the interest of the parties, of the court, and the selection of a jury? And this has to do with the jury selection process. What does that process look like, and how do you balance those interests when making your decisions? Judge Thompson. Can you, oh, still on mute.
There we go.
All right.
All right. So in every jury trial, the first thing that we're looking for are jurors who are unbiased, who can be fair and impartial to the parties in the case, whether it's a civil case or a criminal case. And in a criminal case, be fair to the parties means that you have to be fair to the defendant, and you have to be fair to the interests of the people. So from a philosophical standpoint, that's where we start. So how do we get jurors that are going to serve both sides? Well, there's I don't know how many of you have been on jury duty, but there's the voir dire process, where the lawyers from each side proposed questions be asked of the potential jurors. And the jurors answer those questions, usually in our courthouse up at the bench, so that they can have a little bit of their privacy. And the lawyers are able to follow up on those questions. So you would come up to the bench and I would say, all right, Mr. Snow, you answered question number 17, which was, had you ever been a victim of a violent crime? And so can you just tell me a little bit about that? Then you give me a brief thumbnail of your involvement as a victim or a witness or whatever, and you tell your story. And then I say, as the judge to you, all right, well, sir, is there anything about that experience that would prevent you from being a fair and impartial juror if you were seated in this case? Now it's up to you. And you say yes or no. Most of the time, 99%, everybody says, no, I can sit as a fair and impartial juror.
Thanks.
Now, sometimes they're lying to you. The lawyers have an opportunity at the bench to do follow-up questions. And, you know, once in a while, somebody's a wolf in lamb's clothing. They're pretending that they could be fair and impartial when really they would have no intention of being that way. Or the opposite is true. Sometimes there are people who are trying to get out of jury duty. And so they say, no, I could not be fair and impartial, when really they could. And there
Yes, Thompson, thank you so much. I'm sorry to cut you off. I do apologize, but yep. So thank you. And does anyone else want to respond to that question about balancing the interests of the parties and the judges? And ironically, many of you saw me just before all this went down in the courthouse. So I was personally experienced that process. And so it's very, very important. Our next question is, while the priority is public safety, what do you propose should be done for reentry treatment and diversion so that we allow people a second chance in society and save on taxpayer dollars? So this is about reentry. Who wants to take that question on? Mr. Adams. Still mute. There we go. All right.
So as I was starting to address at the end of the last question, Tori, the part of reentry that's important is not just having somebody supervising you all the time. You know, the real key to reentry, as I see it, is to develop job opportunities, learning opportunities, so that when someone's coming out, there is an alternative to coming back to the same people, the same behaviors, and the same opportunities for, I'll say, opportunities for mischief or opportunities for crime. That is really what reentry is all about, right? Currently, I think a lot of the judges try to fashion in their probation the type of safeguards that say you must get a job, you must, and it's great to give that directive, but the alternative, if they don't follow that, is to put them back in jail. It's not just the order or the directive to go find this position, it's the service that have a sword of Damocles held over your head.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adams. Does anyone else want to respond to this question about recidivism? Let me make sure I don't see any. Speak up. Okay. All right. Then our next question, this is a tricky one, but see who's brave enough to take it on. What is deemed as cruel and unusual punishment for a diverse category of crimes as we seek lower recidivism rates without sentence disparity? It's I'm trying to understand. I think the question is how much is too much when trying to deal with a specific crime. What do you feel kind of crosses the line when it comes to sentencing? I think I understand that question correctly. Maybe you can interpret it as you see fit. Mr. Trunnell, is that your hand I see?
Yeah, let me see if I can unmute. Am I unmuted? Yes. I am unmuted. That's why we have sentencing guidelines. Sentencing guidelines are a process by which we put together the crime, we give points for crime, we give points for recidivism, and we give points for other parts of the criminal justice system as it relates to basically who the person is. And what sentencing guidelines do is make sure that we all live in the same sort of balance of what the sentences are. And for you to go below the guidelines or for you to go above the guidelines, you ultimately have to break out why you did it. And there are some crimes that are so heinous that they go above the guidelines. And there are situations where, because of extenuating circumstances, you go below the guidelines. So, but we have a whole process in place, judiciary, called the criminal justice system. It's the Maryland Criminal Sentencing Guidelines that actually help us so that we don't do that cruel and unusual punishment. One of the things that we no longer have in Maryland is we no longer have the death penalty. So we don't have that discussion anymore as far as it relates to whether it's cruel and unusual punishment or not. But from a standpoint of the crimes that people commit in the felony trial range, they have sentencing guidelines, and that's what the whole purpose of the sentencing guidelines are. We also have the reinvention, the
Thank you, Judge Trunnell. Yes, sir. So thank you so much. And then I believe I saw Judge Morris's hand. Judge Morris, would you like to respond?
Yes, actually, Judge Trunnell took the words right out of my mouth as far as with the sentencing guidelines, that everything that he says, I would definitely agree with that as well. The second piece of it that I believe that he was going to mention is the Justice Reinvention Act. When we as judges have people who violate our probation, there was this legislation now that makes sure that when people are backing up a certain amount of time, say if you were sentenced to 10 years and then you serve 5 and then there's 5 years left of probation, if someone comes in for a technical violation, for instance, they didn't have a new a new crime. The purpose of that is for it to be graduated sentencing. So you would get maybe 15 days instead of the whole 5 years, or 30 days, so it's graduated. The purpose of that is so someone doesn't get 5 full years for something that's a relatively minor violation of our probation. So that was the other piece that I wanted to say, that we as judges, we follow that.
Thank you so much, Judge Morris. And I didn't see any other hands, so let's move on to the next question. Many people with underlying mental health or co-occurring behavioral health issues end up in the correctional system. How do we balance public safety with rehabilitation and treatment? How would you work not only with the court system, but with the healthcare system? Can you speak to any experience with behavioral health concerns?
Mm-hmm.
It's a very, very good question. Raise your hand. All right, Judge Morris, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yes. So it's interesting, as judges, it's one of the things, going back to that new trial judges orientation, there is a significant part of that orientation that's on mental health, that they train us as judges to identify some of the mental health issues and symptoms of the people who come before us, whether in criminal cases or civil cases. It's a very important to be able to identify those issues. I know that for me personally, one of the ones when I've seen it is that's memorable is through a situation where there was a bail review of someone who was having a mental health issue. With that, referring him and helping him to get the help that he needs, I was able to do that only because I had that training to identify some of those symptoms. So without him just going untreated through the system.
Thank you, Judge Morris. And do we have anyone else that wishes to respond to the question about the relationship between behavioral health and corrections? Nope, I don't see any hands. All right, let's move to the next question. Why did you choose to serve in Anne Arundel County rather than any other county in Maryland? Why did you choose to serve in Anne Arundel County? Oh wait, let's pause 1 second. Did I see Judge Alban? Did you want to respond to the last question?
I did a little bit, but it's
yes.
okay if you want to move on.
No, that's fine. Go ahead. I just didn't see you.
A little bit, as some of my experience comes both from a prosecutor's point of view and from the judge's point of view. There are programs in prison, and there's a Patuxent program, and it's a youthful offenders program, and there's different things that there is the ability sometimes in very violent cases where there is a mental health component, but it's not totally excused by the mental health component, that you can order offenders to be evaluated to get put into that program. So there are some services, not nearly enough within the prison system, that are available to judges to use in their sentencing. But there is that aspect. And then if mental health is so, if they couldn't tell the right from wrong and they're found not criminally responsible, that doesn't mean they just walk out on the street. Oftentimes that means they're in a locked facility getting the mental health treatment that they need, and there's systems set in place to ensure that that mental health component that led to that dangerous behavior is being addressed adequately before they are released to the community. So there are some systems set up both in prison and through the Department of Mental Health, or Health and Hygiene. I mean.
Thank you so much for that response. And then I believe we had Judge Thompson. Did you want to respond to that as well?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. No, I was trying to get your attention because I don't think you can see me because it's telling me that my camera is no longer detectable.
Fortunately, yeah, we've got some folks that are watching and pinging me, letting me know. So we've got you covered now.
Just wanted to make sure I was still on the call.
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, so I don't think we have anyone else that wishes to respond to this question. So let's return to the other question, which is why you chose to serve in Anne Arundel County as opposed to another jurisdiction. And I see you, Ms. Decesaris.
Well, first of all, in order to serve in any jurisdiction, you have to live in that jurisdiction or move there within 6 months. Actually, I've lived in this jurisdiction for over 22 years. And reason I want to serve here in Anne Arundel County is because I want to be a true public servant again, as I was in Prince George's County as a teacher. I want to be able to be a judge so that I can be able to effectuate change. And as I mentioned before, that change needs to come with, rehabilitation of nonviolent offenders and dealing with criminals in a sense that they're not all put in jail. And also my biggest issue is young African-American men, because my experience when I was teaching has really ingrained in me that we need as a community, especially in Anne Arundel County, to do what we can, especially as judges. And we need to stop the bias that's going on in the courtrooms, and that we need to treat everybody with the same dignity and respect as we would anybody who appears in front of us. But because I see it so much in the courtrooms, and I saw it so much when I was teaching, I think that, as a public servant for Anne Arundel County, I'll be able to make that change. And that's why I want to serve in Anne Arundel County.
Thank you so much, Mr. Decesaris. Anyone else?
I will jump into that, Tori, if I
Yes.
can. Just to say, Annette is right. Under Maryland law, you must serve in the county where you live. So that's the first answer. In my own case, I've lived in Anne Arundel County since 1987. I'm invested in this county. This is where I've raised my children. This is where my grandchildren are being raised by their parents, and sometimes me and my wife. This is where my neighbors are. This is where my friends are. This is where my local church is. I love Anne Arundel County. And I think that's why the Constitution of our state requires judges to serve in the county where they live, so that they're part of the community, so that they're invested in the community. And I think that's important, not only to me, but it should be important to all of us. We don't want judges who just, parachute in from somewhere else and try to help us fix our problems. We want judges who are actually active parts of the community.
Thank you so much, Judge Thompson. We have a couple more questions left. This is an interesting. What actions have you taken, or specifically in a proactive manner, to make change in helping Anne Arundel County to be more diversified? And I think the theme of this question is how, obviously there's a lot of tension happening in our community, right? Whether it's racial tension or political tension, but obviously we understand that we're stronger when we're united. So what actions have you taken and I would say helping bring people together and helping people understand other perspectives in our county. And I don't see everyone up here, so if someone can help me, if someone's raising their hand. Did I see Judge Morris? Yes, I did. Judge Morris.
Well, one of the things that I did was, so this January, I was the keynote speaker, and I had the privilege of being a keynote speaker at the Martin Luther King Jr. Breakfast. And one of the things that I did was I told my story of how, from my perspective, of the different issues that I faced throughout my entire career and my entire life, and actually talk about the different instances of racial, whether it was biases, my own personal growth in going in different environments, and my perspective. And a lot of people came up to me afterwards and shared their stories and said, how my story resonated with them or got them to think about things that they had never considered before. So it was a real conversation starter, and I was really humbled to play a small part in that.
Thank you so much, Judge Morris. Is there anyone else? Mr. Adams.
So, Tori, for me, I had the opportunity when I was the state's attorney to create relationships with Pastor Tillett from the NAACP and some of the clergy around the county to help give them access into the criminal justice system that I don't think they had before. Frequently, and I would say over the course of my 4 years, I probably had Pastor Tillett in my office more than any criminal defense attorney, discussing issues about the equal application of the law inside of the specifically the Annapolis community and the Anne Arundel County community. And so, I pointed to earlier when I hired Ms. Devasty Jones as the first African-American deputy state's attorney in the county. My work was designed to bring inclusion into a criminal justice system that I felt and heard that seemed to be inaccessible prior to my arrival as the state's attorney. I think it culminated, like I said, with the Crofton News case earlier, and then actually going into the legislature to get a crime that had not been recognized as one against a community, recognized by our legislature as a crime against our particular community. And so, the question being what proactive steps were taken, over the 4 years that I was there, that's what I strove to do in my service to Anne Arundel.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Our last question, and after we do this, we want everyone to stay tuned because we do have some announcements for the community. But our last question kind of revolve around the drug court in Anne Arundel County. And what are your thoughts on the drug court and your position on the Anne Arundel County Drug Court here in Anne Arundel County? Mr. Trunnell, Judge Trunnell, sorry.
Oh, no worries. It's a program that we need to have. I mean, what we had in this case, okay, go back to I was prosecutor in Prince George's County in the late 80s and the early 90s. It was the heyday of crack cocaine. If someone had told me that we would have a heroin epidemic in the United States, I would have absolutely said you're crazy. But that's what we have now, because pharmaceuticals pumped out synthetic heroin. We now have a heroin problem. We still have a crack cocaine problem in Anne Arundel County. We still have other drug problems in Anne Arundel County. And many of these people, what you see with some of these people is you don't see someone who has a lifetime of crime. You see a person who's going along, doing okay, and then all of a sudden they have a history of burglaries, or they have a history of thefts, or they have a history of this and that. And you look at those people and you see that those crimes are drug related. And the way we do the drug court, the way the drug court is done, both I'm judge now, and before that as doing criminal defense attorney, I was involved in the drug court program from the beginning as well, is that we put together an intense program that is instantaneous reward and instantaneous punishment. And at the end, we hope we get through this program, which lasts anywhere from a year to 18 months or even to 2 years. We allow that program to help these individuals so they don't recommit their crimes, because a lot of these drug crimes are, okay,
yes.
Sorry.
Thank you, Judge Trunnell. And we do appreciate your response. And then Mr. Adams, you get the last word.
Well, obviously, I'm a big proponent of the drug court system because, long-term behavior, for two reasons: long-term behavioral modification and the way that recovery happens requires a system of checks and balances and opportunities to fail, rebuild, fail, rebuild. So frequently in recovery, you see people suffering from addiction relapse. Quite honestly, it's usually 6 or 7 times before someone can really find long-term recovery. And so without a program like drug court that allows a graduated sanction and the opportunity to relapse, fail, recover, and eventually find their way through that journey into a long-term sustained recovery with a solid foundation of behavioral modification, we could never find an alternative but for incarceration for people suffering from addiction. So, again, it's why I helped create the Safe Stations program. It's why I helped double the size of drug court. It's why I went through the county addressing children and parents in the Not My Child program, is all in with making that program work.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adams. And that actually concludes our public Q&A session. Thank you so much for your participation. Before you all sign off, I do want to ask you to stick around as we have a couple more announcements for our observers. I do want to introduce Trifina Ellis Johnson, who is a board member of the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections, and she has information on the upcoming primary elections. So just bear with us as we get her on and she shares some updates.
Am I ready?
Yes.
Oh, good evening, everyone. Do you have my slides available? There we are. Good evening. And thank you. And good evening to everyone. And thank you for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be a guest for the primary voting tips. I know that this is what our candidates would like for us to do this evening. And as we go into June 2nd, is that they want our votes. So we're asking that everyone has the opportunity to vote. Will someone be able to share the slides with me as I move forward? Voted ballots must be postmarked on or before June 2nd. So it's very important that you have your ballots into the post office no later if you're going to mail them on June 2nd by 5 o'clock. However, we do have the opportunity to put your ballots in our ballot box. We do have ballot boxes in Anne Arundel County. So first of all, for voting tips, no postage is needed to return your ballot. You will get a post-paid return envelope with your ballot. Voted ballots must be postmarked on or before June 2nd. And again, I emphasize, if you're going to take them to the post office, please have them postmarked by 5 p.m. If you take them to the post office after 5 p.m., your ballot will not be counted because it will be considered late. Also, if you would like to take them to our voting centers, you may take them there and you can drop them off as late as 8 p.m. up on until June 2nd. Also, if a voter cannot vote by mail, there are 4 vote centers in Anne Arundel County, and they are located. One is in Odenton at the Regional Library. There's another one in Glen Burnie at the Regional Library, Severna Park Community Library, the Roger Pitt Moyer Recreation Center. The Anne Arundel County Board of Elections is a drop-off location only. Now, these particular voting sites are also going to be available on June 2nd so that you may go there and you can vote in person if you like. Also, voting tips continue. Now, I want to go back and tell you that the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections will only be for a drop-off location. You may not be able to go in there to vote at that particular center or site. The voting locations will be open on June 2nd from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you aren't sure if you are registered or at what address, check your voter registration status by visiting our voter services site. If you do not have an internet access, you may call 1-800-222-8683 and you can be able to tell if you are registered to vote. The deadline to register to vote is Wednesday, May 22nd, 27th, 2020. That's the deadline to register to vote. Now, how do voters update their address? You may give the local board of elections where you currently live, your new address information. You can also use your voter registration application to make the change, or you can submit in writing your new address. Voters must update their address with their local boards of elections. Next slide, please. Barcodes. Now, when you have received your ballots in the mail, and I've had some constituents who have asked me about the barcodes. I want to address the barcodes on the back. The barcode is how each of the local boards receive the ballot into our voter registration system, and they're able to scan their barcode and the ballot is received for the voter. And the barcode is the voter's tracking number for that ballot. And also it gives you the opportunity to say that you have cast a vote, which will give you credit for voting. The numbers printed below that barcode is the human readable data in that barcode. We've had instances where the barcode could not be read by the scanners being used. So it's another way for the staff to manually enter the information on our into our voter registration system. Next slide, please. That is the picture of the drop box. If you have not put your ballot in the drop box or the mail, that is the drop box. That is what it looked like. The drop box is available 24/7 up until June 2nd. It is manned by cameras. So it is also, the ballots are being collected on a daily basis until 8:00 p.m. at night, except Sundays. Next picture, please. Next slide. The 5 ballot drop box locations for Anne Arundel County, they are open now, and they were open on May 18th. The start of canvassing for the mail-in ballots has been delayed. We started that yesterday at today at 9 a.m. The canvassing process and ballot views will be available to view via daily live streams, and we started that today. The live streams will start May 21st through June 12th, excluding Sundays. And I invite you to go to the board website so you can get the link if you would like to view where the ballots will be viewed. And our canvassing started today. Next slide, please. So you are encouraged to watch the video by mail on the board website. And here I have given you the address so that you can visit the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections website. This is our mailing address. We're located on Bay Meadow Drive. And you also have the State Board of Elections address. So you also have the website to visit the State Board of Elections. So at this time, you have heard from our candidates this evening. They want us to vote. They need our votes. So I encourage each one of us to go out and vote, and encourage all your family and friends who are eligible to vote to go and vote. Things are done manually this year because of the pandemic, and it's done a little different, but we encourage you to go out and vote. It's very important. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Trifini. And again, just to echo those sentiments, this is a very important part of this process. Next, we're going to hear from Moniqua Roberts-Gray. She's a member of the North Anne Arundel Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, and she has a final announcement.
Can you hear me, Chloe? Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. I'm Monique Roberts Gray, a member of North Arundel County Alumnae Chapter, and also a public affairs specialist with the U.S. Census Bureau. In addition to our charge to encourage folks to vote, we also want to talk about the importance of the 2020 census. Next slide, please. The Census Bureau mission is to serve as the nation's leading provider of quality data about its people and its economy. The U.S. Constitution requires an actual enumeration of the persons residing in the United States every 10 years. And these results will actually be disseminated to the President, the states, and the American people. Next slide, please. The 2020 census is very important. Again, I indicated that it's mandated by Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution. We count every person every 10 years, ending in 0 since 1790. Every resident living in the United States will be counted once, only once, and in the right place. Your responses are private and confidential, and they're protected by federal law. These responses are used to produce the statistics that we use. Next slide, please. Once again, I want to reiterate the census is safe, private, and confidential. It's protected under U.S. Title 13 and other federal laws to protect the census and other data that our agency collects. Your information is never published, including your name, address, or any GPS coordinates. If anyone ever contacts you requesting your social security number or bank or credit card information, notify the police immediately because that is a scam. That's something that we don't do at the agency. The Census Bureau collects information to produce statistics. So any information collected by the agency cannot be used against respondents by any government agency or court. In addition, because we are doing the 2020 census exclusively online, we have put cybersecurity measures in place that ensure that the highest standards have been observed. I also wanted to share that Census Bureau employees are sworn to protect the confidentiality of this information for life. And there are severe penalties if that is not upheld. If you just scroll up for a second, you just want to protect that information for life. Next slide. So you're probably thinking, why is the census important? Very important. It determines the number of seats each state has in the U.S. House of Representatives. It defines congressional and state legislative districts, school districts, and voting precincts. Not to mention, there's an annual allocation of $675 billion in federal funding that goes to each individual state and participants who take the census. It also provides insight to local governments, businesses, and community planning groups for planning purposes. And it also serves as a benchmark for every other United States survey that is done. Next slide, please. And speaking of those surveys, most people are familiar with our 2020 census that happens every 10 years, but I just wanted to share that we have annually over 160 surveys conducted that look at households and businesses in addition to the 2020 census. And you can see some of them noted on the screen. The economic census, which has focused on businesses, the census of governments, and all of this vital information helps you to make decisions that impact your community. Next slide, please. I wanted to really share and re-emphasize to you that there are 3 ways to complete the census: online, by phone, or by mail. It's very quick and easy. It takes about 10 minutes to complete. It's safe, it's secure, and it's confidential. Your information and privacy are protected. Your responses, once you fill out the census, again, will direct billions of dollars in federal funds to local communities for school, roads, and other public services. So if you get an opportunity, please encourage those who haven't had an opportunity to fill out the census to do so immediately. At last count, we were over 50% of households had completed the census. That's about 76 million individuals. Go to my2020census.gov and you're able to fill the census out. If not, again, by phone or by mail. Next slide, please. Again, I just wanted to reiterate the North Arundel County Alumnae Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated encourage you to exercise your right to vote. because your voice must be heard. In addition, please complete the 2020 census. It is your civic duty, and continue all people to be a good service to your community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Moniqua. And I can vouch for how easy the process is. I completed my census already, and it did not take long at all. At this time, we are going to give all of our judges 30 seconds. You hear me? 30 seconds, strict on the time to give your final thoughts. And as we prepare to wrap things up, we are going to start with Judge Morris. 30 seconds with your final thoughts from today.
My final thought is that I'm going to ask the viewers to vote on June 2nd for the judges who've been through the vetting process, who have been appointed by the governor through a bipartisan or nonpartisan process, and who have received the bipartisan endorsement of elected officials across Anne Arundel County and the Maryland State Bar Association as well. Please vote. There's 4 judges. We would encourage you to vote for us, all 4, Alban, Morris, Thompson, and Trunnell. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Judge Trunnell.
Second that, we went through a very intense vetting process. We went through a lot of specialty bars. We were vetted by the Anne Arundel County Bar Association. We were vetted by a bipartisan commission, and we were the 4 found to be qualified. And as such, we were then sent on to the governor and were appointed by Governor Hogan. We do have the bipartisan support of the both Democratic and Republican office holders, and we would ask you to vote for Alban, Morris, Thompson, and Trunnell.
Thank you. Ms. Decesaris. Ms. Decesaris, your 30-second closing remarks.
Yes. Sorry, I was unmuting. I want to thank everybody for inviting us. I appreciate you all giving us the opportunity, especially myself. I am not a judge yet, but I would like to be a judge, and I would like to be able to serve you in your communities and in Anne Arundel County specifically. I think that my experience and my background provides me with the opportunities to be able to serve you in a way that's effective and to make some positive change within our court system so that everybody's treated fairly and with dignity and respect. And thank you so much, and have a good evening.
Thank you so much, Ms. Decesaris. Judge Alban.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to be here to speak with you all tonight. And as parting thoughts, I would echo again what Judge Morris and Judge Trunnell said. The 4 of us have gone through a thorough vetting process, and we bring some skills to the bench that have been tested already. What I'd like to say is the judicial experience is going to be really important in our world today. We're going through a very difficult and unprecedented time, and the 4 of us have judicial experience and are doing the job, and we're going to be able to help do that better. So I would ask you to vote for all 4 of us, Alban, Morris, Thompson, and Trunnell. Thank you.
Thank you. Judge Thompson.
Well, it's going to sound like I have never had an original thought, because I'm going to ask you to vote for Alban, Morris, Thompson, and Trunnell as well. And I want to say about judicial experience, look, you've heard from 6 great people tonight. All of us are serving the public in one way or another. My colleagues, Judge Trunnell, Judge Morris, Judge Alban, and I are serving the public on the bench. And judicial experience really counts for a lot. Experience as a lawyer, that gets you in the front door. But there's nothing that quite compares to the experience that you get on the bench as a judge. We will all have 2 years experience or more by the time this election comes along. And if you replace one of us, you're going to start with somebody who has 0 judicial experience.
Thank you.
I don't think that would be a good thing.
Thank you. Mr. Adams. Mr. Adams, your 30-second closing remarks.
Had to unmute, Tori. Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out, and I'm going to ask you to vote on the merit of the candidates. I provide an independent, fair, and proven voice of all the folks that are standing before you. You've had 4 years to watch me in office and equally apply the law. And honestly, I would ask for your particular vote because I've demonstrated to you, the citizens of this county, that I care, that I apply the law equally, that I'm fair, and that I'm honest.
Thank you so much. At this time, we'll turn it over to Antonio Downing, the first vice chair of the Anne Arundel County NAACP.
Thank you, Tori. I would like to thank my partnering organizations in putting on this judicial town hall. We normally call ourselves a collective because collectively we combine together to bring informative information to the community. I also would like to thank the co-moderators of the event, Nike Robinson and Mr. Tori Snow. The both of you all did a fantastic job in moderating tonight's judicial town hall. And also I'd like to thank the judicial candidates. I know there were some tough questions. Many of you were thinking quickly on your feet, but we wanted to give you a platform to at least speak to the viewing audience that will be voting for you on June 2nd. And then last but not least, I want to thank our Facebook audience as well. Thank you for tuning in to get informed about these candidates. As it was mentioned earlier, and as it was reiterated, please vote. You've heard the candidates' position. You had a chance to read their bios and their literature that they had distributed throughout their various mailers or their Facebook or social media posting. Please go out and vote for the candidate that best represent your interests. On behalf of the Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP, under the leadership of President Jacqueline Alsip, I'd like to say thank you all and have a good night, and please be safe. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Antonio.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Great discussion.
Thanks, Tori.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.